Anup Khandelwal. I'm the moderator of today's webinar on this important subject of United for Strengthening the Supply Chain to Deliver COVID-19 Vaccine at Scale. So this session, important session, is going live on Facebook and LinkedIn. Just a little background on why this subject is so important. And I'm sure everybody is aware that COVID-19 has disrupted the entire universe at an unprecedented scale, with over 25 million people infected the world over, with about 850,000 deaths and counting. We in India have also been very seriously impacted negatively with this, with about 3.6 million cases and about 69,000 deaths and counting as of yesterday evening. The pandemic, besides the medical issues, has put our lives almost in a topsy-turvy situation. And it is an unprecedented thing which has impacted the economy and livelihood of the humankind. As a top priority mitigation measure, there's a frantic search for vaccine the world over. As per the Honorable Health Minister of India, there are about 6 vaccine candidates in the advanced stages of development, and he expects that these should be available by early next year. Now, the situation is such that even if it is available, are we ready in terms of the entire value chain? The supply chain is the background, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the systems. Are we ready is something which we have to figure out. So to discuss this, we have an eminent panel with us today who will take us through the 3 streams of the discussion. The session 1 is going to be on priority setting and system readiness to deliver at scale. We will have Professor Wilfred William. He is the Professor, Xavier Institute of Management, Bhubaneswar. Dr. Sanjay Kapoor, he is the Managing Director, GSI India. Professor Prashant Yadav, unfortunately, because of the timing issues, he will not be able to join us, but we'll play a video from him. He is the lecturer, Harvard Medical School and affiliate professor INSEAD. He's based out of US. The session 2 will be on technology and solutions to deliver and monitor. This will be covered by Mr. Shubhadeep Guha, who's the Director Media Services, Google, and Professor Janat Shah, is the Director, IIM Udaipur. The third session will be on power of partnership for last mile delivery. We will have this covered by Dr. Raj Shankar Ghosh, who's the Deputy Director, Vaccine Delivery, BMGF. Mr. Neeraj Jain, he is the Country Director, India Path. Mr. Dheeraj Arora, Vice President, Modern Trade, E-commerce, Cash and Carry, and Institutional Business at Unilever India. But before that, I will like to invite Dr. Palo, who is the CEO of PPHF. People to People Health Foundation works closely with communities and key actors on sustainable solutions for public health. Challenges, areas of expertise include infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, environmental health, women, adolescent, and child health nutrition. Over to you, Dr. Palo, to kick off this session, important session, and guide us through. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Anup. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on United for Strengthening the Supply Chain to Deliver COVID Vaccine at Scale. This is very important topic for all of us. I would like to thank you all for your participation in this important webinar. This is a joint initiative by People to People Health Foundation and CASEFIRE with our strategic partners, FLAIR, JSI International, PATH, RTI International, and Bihara. I would like to thank you all our partners for this initiative. I would also like to thank you, the speakers of today's webinar. The agenda of today's webinar, as Anup mentioned, is 3 sub-themes: priority setting, system readiness, and how to deliver at scale. This is one of the topic we all would like to learn from and hear from the understanding and the wisdom and the experience of the panelists today. Technology and solution is another area of kind of which could be a breakthrough in our scaling this whole issue. Power of partnership is another kind of important issue for all of us to deliver to the last mile, at the community level. Despite the success of routine immunization program, we need new delivery strategies to deliver at such scale called for a global pandemic. Innovation, technology, partnership are some of the critical drivers to meet the challenges. Today we have a mixture of speakers from academia, development agency, industry, and foundation to help us to understand better the issues and our readiness and critical drivers around supply chain and COVID-19 vaccine. I would like to invite all of you again for this important webinar. Let me introduce our moderator again, Mr. Anup Khandelwal, who is co-founder and CEO of K-Spire Solutions from it's a new startup company providing supply chain related solutions. They address the area of mentoring and skill services, focus on primarily on the operations, supply chain, logistic, and public health is one of the new area, kind of where K-Spire, is kind of getting into because of their the founder and the members of the K-Spire are experienced in public sector supply chain. Mr. Anup is a supply chain and management professional with over 35 years of experience in industries like HCL, Bardhaman, HP, UT, Starcom, BD at the senior level. So I would like to kind of welcome again Mr. Anup to conduct the sessions today. And I am looking forward to your participation and insightful discussion today. Welcome again, everyone, and thank you. Over to Mr. Anup.
Thank you, Dr. Paulo. Before we begin the session, I would like to thank all the participants, who are with us today, and would request them that they can, start putting their questions as the session goes on. And towards the end of the session 3, we have a Q&A session for about 15 to 20 minutes, where we shall, try to answer as many questions as possible, which will be answered by the eminent panel over here. And also, at the end of every session, we will have a 2 minutes poll, where we will have for you to vote, and those voting results would also be available immediately. So with that, we will kick off the session 1, which is priority setting and system readiness to deliver at scale. For this session 1 today, we have the first speaker of the day is Professor William. He is the Professor Operations Management and Decision Sciences, XIMB Bhubaneswar. He will cover the topic of supply chain operational challenges for delivering COVID-19 vaccine and how to mitigate them. Before that, I would like to speak a few words about Professor Williams. Dr. Williams has more than 30 years of academic experience in supply chain operations and has worked in EIL, NITI, and XIMB, where he is currently heading this function. He's with XIMB since 1994 and has served in various key positions in this institute of repute. He has done various consulting assignments and research in operations and supply chain transformation. He's an authority on supply chain nuances. So over to you, Professor William.
Good morning to all. And I thank the organizers, PPHF and K-Spire, for inviting me to take part in this panel discussion. The topic is definitely extremely relevant. Not only that, all of us are basically worried. How do we really do this job where the volume, velocity, and many other challenges are awaiting as far as the COVID-19 vaccines are considered? I was just looking at challenges when I was trying to actually list. I found too many. So I thought, let me have the key challenges here, where because the mankind has not seen such a scale of mass immunization so far. We have been dealing with 25, 30 million kind of vaccine delivery and immunization before. But what we are talking now here is close to a billion, a little more than a billion. So one of the biggest challenges, volume and velocity. Volume essentially is definitely is highly worrying thing for us. Second is velocity. Everybody would like to be vaccinated. The very first question which will come to us is initially the supply will also be limited. When the supply is limited, that means rationing. And rationing means some criteria for prioritizing who will be eligible for the first round of vaccination. Now, if you really ask, many people have very different kind of views. One of the views is as far as healthcare providers are concerned, they should stand the first chance. Some say elders, some say the children. Now, many people have been talking about healthcare workers because save the savior could be one such model initially. Then saviors will be able to save others. But it is, of course, an issue which needs to be really debated, discussed. Naturally, connected with volume and velocity will be infrastructure and human resources. Inadequate healthcare infrastructure has always been a worry, even for delivering regular healthcare. We all know the inadequacy of healthcare infrastructure is worrying for us. And administering COVID-19 vaccine could worsen the situation because we are not talking about either or, we are talking about both. Existing healthcare must continue, facilities must continue. At the same time, you would like to see the COVID-19 delivery also is met efficiently. Now, some more challenges related with this will be, of course, we have the technology to some extent. We have the technology. The challenge will be integration and maintenance. I emphasize more on maintenance because we are usually a little poor in maintenance, and maintenance needs a lot of human resource training at all the levels. For example, even cold chain handlers, which will be required. Do we have sufficient number at all the places? The question of various kinds of skill set which is required, that will become a problem. And administering vaccine at such a scale, the one of the challenges for India is very diverse country. One size fits all. That kind of situation will not be possible. That means we need to have classification, and for each classification, we need to have a strategy. How do we deliver and administer vaccines for a specific kind of area? Now, with many of these challenges, I was thinking, if government think that they would be able to augment their resources, more stocking points, more channel for delivery, more number of people to be trained, it just will not be possible. It just will not be possible. Government alone can't do. They have been supporting it, vaccine so far, but as I said, that is much less compared to what we are likely to envisage now. So here, collaboration with private and social organization, will be extremely necessary, perhaps. In fact, I call this the Uberization of COVID-19 delivery and administering. Something like central coordination and local execution. That means the degree of visibility of the supply chain should be such that we should be able to see the entire supply chain, including the part which doesn't belong to government, but we have collaborated with private organizations like many cold chain providers, hospitals, clinics. All those places basically needs to be integrated such that The resources can be pooled, and we have resources that are locally available. Just like, suppose the vaccine runs out in one such location, just like Uber immediately flashes the call to several such people in that area. The one which is available will come and meet the requirement. Similarly, we should be in a position to see that the entire supply chain is visible from end to end, or integrated supply chain. That means the role of technology, deploy the entire technology available to see. We will be in a position to look at the current stock position, how much stock is where, then how much is being required maybe in the next week or next fortnight. More than that, since in this COVID-19, we need to also see in case of any adverse effect. That means tracking to find which batch of vaccine has gone to which population will be extremely necessary, so that in case of any adverse effect happens, we should be able to see and track and see which all places it might have gone and quickly take action. That was traceability. I'm talking about the last mile. That's why, because ultimately administering happens at the point of administering, where it's maybe a village, a small clinic, some places like that. As a result, we should be in a position to see that every patient who gets the batch number should be tracked immediately and should be fed in, which can be done from a handheld device perhaps and all. We should be in a position to make a technology such that it basically integrates with the overall supply chain. This will be extremely necessary for us, otherwise we'll not be able to take the corrective action. But here, the basic problem I feel will be the situation will be unfolding. Now, typically when we plan risk, many such things can be seen, but here it's almost uncertain situation. Many such situations will unfold, and we should be in a position to take care of scenarios which is unfolding. So it will always be, we should be ready for various demand level, let us see, various location, various kind of logistics models. That means we should be in a position to have a scenario based planning. So we create several scenarios so that in case one such situation we see which is closest to one specific scenario which is being planned, our action time will be reduced. We will not be taking so much time to act. That means creating scenarios and using simulation to predict risk at the highest level will be required, and they should be in a position to help people who are at the ground level. Another thing which I would like to highlight in a limited time is process innovation. Actually, whenever we say that there is a high volume, the question comes to our mind is, can we standardize it? The high volume goes with the standard process. Here, yes, standardization after classification will be definitely required, and process innovation such that we are in a position to do the immunization for a large number in the shortest possible time. That will be the key. That means constantly we have to innovate the process depending on the need for a specific group, ethnic group, geographical group. Another thing which basically it happens is when you divide the area among the people for immunization, there always exists a confusion. Thereby, we are not able to understand whose area ends where and who starts where. So I feel in this situation, we should be in a position to have some geofencing now. Now we have technology, we can have geofencing, and immediately coordinates can be fixed. And we say, fine, up to this coordinate belongs to you, and this coordinate belongs to the other person. Biggest problem will be, I feel, preparing human resource. This is what, both at the competency level and the number wise, we are basically having challenge. And this activity can start right now. When we talk about, certain who should be enrolled, candidates should be immediately, we should be able to identify who can be trained. Training must commence. In fact, in a new skill, you can see, recognition of prior learning. If somebody has no certification but has knowledge of doing so, the person should be in a position to be trained and certified for immunization. And of course, last point is I would like, because we have to learn and adapt. In a situation like this, we can't forecast, as a result, you have to learn and adapt ourselves. That's what basically, in a brief, I wanted to tell to cope up with the big, huge challenge, the monumental challenge, what we are likely to face.
Thank you, Professor William.
Thank you.
I know the time is too short for you to really cover this subject, but I think I picked up a few critical points which you highlighted, which was Uberization, scenario-based planning, geofencing, and learn and adapt. I think
Right.
these are very critical 3 to 4 points which I captured. But
Right.
before I let you go, Professor William, I have a question. You would have read and and heard in the news that there's a lot of sort of cornering of the vaccine. There's vaccine nationalism, so-called, taking place where every country is trying to corner, vaccine. Like Britain, they've got 70 million people, but they have, placed orders for 350 million. So what do you think that we should, how do we address the vaccine nationalism?
Actually, every country think the country comes first for them. So that is definitely something. But in a situation like this, one has to understand that if any pocket remains, unvaccinated globally, the rest of the population can't be safe. One has to keep in mind that very clearly. Just
True.
like, today when we are talking about, I can really use certain kind of energy source because I'm a small nation and all are a big nation, I can afford it. One has to understand that any part of the globe, if they do something, the entire globe becomes unsustainable. So it is either live all or die all model.
Right.
One has to think this. So as a result, I think one has to be a little more prudent and try to see equitable distribution takes place. And that is the only path for us. Nothing else can.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank
Now,
you. Thank you.
thank you, sir. Now we will move on to the second speaker of today, Dr. Sanjay Kapoor, who is the Managing Director of JSI India. He will take us through the topic of critical drivers for implementation of stable supply chain to deliver potential COVID-19 vaccines. I'll give a little brief about Dr. Sanjay Kapoor, who has got about 25 years of experience in public health. He is currently the Managing Director of JSI India and has spearheaded in raising, funding of recently about $38 million. He works very closely with the Government of India and in the reproductive and child health infectious diseases. He is recipient of the International Michael K. White Memorial Award of the US government for his work in ending preventable child and maternal deaths. Over to you, Dr. Kapoor.
Thank you very much. I again want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this important webinar, probably on the hottest topic in town, which is COVID and COVID vaccine. It's a very timely intervention which is happening. The topic given to me is to discuss critical drivers for implementation of supply chain for potential COVID vaccines. Next slide, please. So before I begin, I would like to put on the table 3 points as preamble to my talk on the drivers. First of all, developing a vaccine is one thing, and making it available to those who need it through efficient supply chains is another ball game altogether. The previous speaker spoke about it. The future speaker will also speak about it. But this is something which we have to keep in mind, that even though people are working overnight on developing vaccines, we would need a lot of work to make sure that they are efficiently available. The second point I want to mention is that there are many unknowns about COVID-19 as well as COVID-19 vaccines. There are more unknowns than knowns about it. As you might have seen in the last 4 or 5 months, there has been a lot of confusion on even how it is spread, whether it's spread through aerosol or not, which mask is better, which is not better, which vaccine is better, which is not better. Is Russia developed the vaccine already? Is China developing it? So there's a lot of confusion in this space on COVID, which we have to keep in mind. And finally, particularly setting the context for India, India has a very strong immunization program, probably the largest in the world. India is also the largest producer of vaccines in the world. It has a robust supply chain mechanism because it is implementing several vaccines for a large chunk of population. But challenges remain, as the previous speaker said, because according to my understanding, in the last several decades, India has not implemented a vaccine for adults in a pandemic context in the last several decades, and therefore there will be some challenges, and we can discuss about them in the future talks. But suffice it to say that India is decently positioned because it has a strong universal immunization program and has an experience of introducing new vaccines, particularly in the last one decade. Next slide. So coming to the critical drivers of supply chain, I have, based on my experience, listed out 10 important critical drivers of supply chain, and all of them are interconnected. One is not more important than the other, and therefore they are not mentioned in a rank order. The first and foremost important one is the forecasting and prioritization. Particularly in the context of COVID vaccine, we are really not sure that how many will be given initially, whom to give first. People are having different views, countries are having different views. Somebody is saying that, the health workers should be given first. People are also saying that, people who are 65 plus with comorbidities should be given. And then what is the scale up plan also is not very clear right now, but it would be a very important critical driver of supply chain for COVID vaccine in India. The second driver for any vaccine, including for COVID, would be the vaccine availability. We are really not sure that, whether it is going to come in the next 3 months or next 6 months. Again, as I mentioned, there is a lot of confusion. People are trying to hurry up. Countries are trying to hurry up. Maybe, who knows, they are bypassing some, critical steps in the process to just be in a hurry, because the desperation of the world on getting the vaccine is so much that, the timeliness probably may get little impacted. How much vaccine would be available at what point of time, the quantity is also a very important driver of supply chain. If we get more supplies initially, we will have to adjust the supply chains accordingly. If we have a scale up plan, suddenly more vaccines come, we will have to adjust that. So what I'm trying to say here is that demand versus supply in COVID-19 vaccine is going to be a very important driver of supply chain. The third, previous slide, yeah. The third driver of any vaccine is the construct of the vaccine. Right now, there are so many candidate vaccines being tried out in India as well as in many, many countries. We are not 100% sure whether we are going to get a single dose vial or it will be a multiple dose vial. We will have to give one dose or we will have to give 2 doses. Will there be a booster? Will there not be a booster? Will it come in the form of pre-filled syringes? Will there be a diluent? Will the syringes be attached as a combination? Because all of this, what I am saying, impacts the supply chain. Because supply chain basically means that the vaccine has to be delivered in a safe and efficacious manner from the manufacturer right down to the last person in the queue. So the vaccines have to be transported, they have to be managed. So the construct of the vaccine puts a lot of influence on how the supply chain would be managed and what would be needed to make sure that we have a stable supply chain. The next point which I have mentioned here is the sourcing. Like in any supply chain, whether it is an FMCG or a vaccine or a PPE kit, sourcing is very, very critical. In the context of the supply chain for vaccine, we may have one supplier, we may have multiple suppliers, we may have something from India, we may have from outside. So there could be issues of vaccine compatibility, and we will have to deal with it. And therefore, sourcing is an important critical, and we are waiting with bated breath that from where are we going to get vaccines. The good point is that India has very large sort of managing capacity and production capacity of vaccines, which gives us a lot of comfort. The fifth point I have mentioned here is very critical particularly for vaccines, is the warehousing and cold chain, particularly the spacing and the storage space. Because vaccines, either they will be kept in +2 to +8 temperature, or they may be kept in -15 to -25 degree, depending on the vaccines. And therefore, storage and supply chain maintenance is a very, very critical driver of supply chain in any vaccine for that matter. Because if the supply chain is not maintained, you may be having false sense of protection, you may be wasting a lot of vaccines, there could be a lot of stockouts, you could be overstocking, and therefore estimation of warehouse and supply chain capacity is a very critical driver of COVID vaccine. One important opportunity, very significant opportunity we have, which has helped us in the last probably few years, is the EVIN, electronic vaccine intelligence network, which I'm sure the government will use thoroughly to make sure that we are doing a proper estimation, cold chain maintenance, stocking in, stocking out. So we have a strong fundamental in place on which we will be able to build on it. Now, I want to emphasize again that this warehousing is not the same as PPE. PPEs can lie on the tarmac or at the airport for 5 days, 7 days, and they will not get destroyed. But vaccine has to be kept moving on a proper temperature from one place to another, and therefore I cannot emphasize this fifth point of warehousing and cold chain to be a very critical driver of supply chain for COVID vaccine. Right now, we are not very sure how much temperature maintenance we need, but we'll come to know. Next slide, please. The next point, again, I've already mentioned, is about the vaccine wastage, because it's an important driver. We usually need proper temperatures to avoid vaccine wastage, because if vaccine is getting wasted or it is becoming ineffective, then your supply chain may get disturbed, and therefore it will get very difficult for you to get the vaccines to the population who need it. The sixth point is a very robust MIS, and people have already spoken about it, that there should be good data flow between different parts of the supply chain. And in this, we have very strong technology. We can use technology. I mean, India is a strong IT hub, and therefore I feel very confident that we would be able to manage the different parts of supply chain and data sharing, leveraging technology. The next point, a very critical point again, is distribution and planning. Right now, we are not very sure that whether COVID vaccine will be distributed only through the public health delivery system, or it will also be given to the private system. And how do we make sure that we are able to provide vaccine, even if it is given to a health provider first, maybe in Arunachal Pradesh and in the Northeast. So distribution planning, making sure that it is efficient, making sure that it is well planned, and therefore everybody gets vaccine who need them at a particular time, is going to be very critical. The ninth point is pricing and resources. In any supply chain, in any vaccine, in any procurement, it is important to make sure that we are talking about the cost, because if the cost of a vaccine is very high, the Indian community, Indian government, as well as the international community will have to figure out from where will the money come. But I'm not sure that people are very worried about this COVID vaccine pricing as of now, because the desperation is so much that the countries are willing to put money into the procurement. But as somebody said, vaccine nationalism, I think that is something which worries me, because if everybody wants to sort of make sure that they want to elbow out other countries, it's going to be very difficult. So international cooperation is going to be very critical, because we are all in it together. And last point is capacity building of health functionaries, because if there are particular needs and skills to be developed for the functionaries, those capacities need to be developed beforehand, so that our last mile delivery, cold chain handlers, ANMs, ASHAs, vaccinators, they are able to give the vaccine if it needs particular skill. So timely capacity building of health functionaries is also very critical, and probably the last point in my supply chain. Thank you very much. For me, I think I would like to end here just by saying that any successful program, whatever planning you may do, if there is no product, there is no program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for this insightful talk. You rightly brought out the critical points of storage, the supply chain, warehouse, storage, and the criticality in terms of the handling, so that the wastage and the expiry is prevented, which is a huge problem. I have a question for you before I let you go. Is you did talk about the warehousing and the infrastructure, but on a scale of say 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, 1 to 10, let's say, what you would think is the readiness, is the current state, and where we are, and quickly how we can scale it up. Just 1 minute.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm hopeful, because India has a robust immunization program, largest in the world. But there will be challenges. There are no doubt, because India has not done this kind of vaccine at such a scale. We don't even know what level of scale we are talking about right now. It's an adult vaccine. It's not for pregnant women and children only. And therefore, and both rural, urban will be sort of included in it. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that India will be able to pull through. It will be very difficult for me to say that India is at 8 or India is at 4. I would not say, India is doing reasonably well. And I'm sure, as the time is going by, the government of India is seized in, there are a lot of planning meetings happening on how to scale up and how to prepare ourselves for handling the vaccine as soon as it comes. So I'm very hopeful, I'm optimistic, and all the partners and all, we will be supporting the government of India to plan it well.
Right, sir. Thank you, Dr. Kapoor. And I think we are all in this together. And before I move on to the other speaker, I would urge the participants to please put in questions in the chat box. We have just, a couple of 3 or 4 questions. So I would urge you to please put in more questions so that, we can have more discussion towards the end of the discussion. The next speaker of today is Professor Prashant Yadav. Unfortunately, Professor Yadav is not with us because he's based out of US. And so we have a video of him. But before that, I will give a little brief about Professor Yadav. He's a renowned global scholar in the area of healthcare supply chains. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development, affiliate professor at INSEAD, and lecturer at Harvard Medical School. He has taught at MIT, University of Michigan, and also the supply chain lead for BMGF. Professor Yadav works closely with multiple country governments and global organizations in improving supply chains for medicines and health products. He's a global thought leader. So let's have Professor Yadav's video, please.
Thanks to the organizers, the People to People Health Foundation and CaseFire for organizing this extremely important session. As we all start collectively thinking about how to prepare a supply chain for large-scale vaccination with potential COVID-19 vaccines, a few key considerations that may be worth reflecting on. First of all, we should take a wide-angle view of the supply chain. So before we focus on the logistics of distribution, let's explore what products are we talking about. It's important to recognize that it's not one vaccine, but a set of vaccines that we ought to be planning for, perhaps a portfolio. We may have more than one vaccine approved and authorized within a short interval of each other. Past experience also shows that when there are new pathogens, often the second-generation vaccines are the ones that offer greater efficacy. Second-generation vaccines also often experiment with new delivery methods, and we already have some candidates entering early-stage trials using intranasal and other kinds of delivery mechanisms, sublingual. So we need to prepare the supply chain for 2 things. First, that it may need to distribute more than one product, even at the start of COVID-19 vaccination. And over time, the supply chain would need to keep in mind product life cycle and versioning issues. This is not always easy, and accommodating this requires designing the supply chain from the start, which can work on this. There is a diverse portfolio with 4 or 5 technology platforms, already over 25 candidates in clinical trials, 4 of them in phase 2 and phase 3 trials. And most of the vaccine developers have already made plans for manufacturing capacity. Some have contracted with their contract manufacturers, some have in-house manufacturing capacity. So when we think about manufacturing capacity, coordination becomes extremely important. If one vaccine developer's candidate fails, the capacity that they have contracted to manufacture needs to be quickly reconfigured for the successful vaccine candidates. And globally, this is trickier, but in India, some of this is already happening because the Serum Institute is manufacturing for multiple candidates, so there's a mini portfolio effect there. Other manufacturers are also planning a similar strategy. This also reminds us that as a country with a large vaccine manufacturing base, India also has a responsibility towards the world of allocating supplies and working closely with international partners such as Gavi, CEPI, WHO, and COVAX. So while manufacturing capacity for vaccines themselves seems to be okay for India, distribution and administration could be hampered because of the shortage of other supplies that are needed for immunization, and these would be relatively simple things such as syringes, vials, needles, rubber stoppers that go in the vials, or plungers in the syringes, things as simple as alcohol wipes, more complex things such as adjuvants that need to go into the vaccine. And as is the case with vaccine manufacturing capacity, here again, we need to ensure that there is a coordination across manufacturers so that limited supplies of vials, syringes, needles, other things are not taken up by one manufacturer. In case the candidate that this manufacturer is developing doesn't succeed, then the ability to quickly transfer those supplies to another manufacturer who may not have as many units of some of the auxiliary products, that becomes challenging. While we wait for a set of vaccines that are proven safe and efficacious, and the pipeline looks very interesting and healthy, we can create a distribution plan that is robust. Distribution planning under uncertainty about product, manufacturing node, capacity, lot release schedule, a lot of the parameters that we acknowledge are uncertain at this point. So planning is not easy, but in the bigger scheme of things, it's also not something extremely challenging. We just need to ensure there is enough flexibility so that we can accommodate the varying needs of the different types of vaccine candidates in the portfolio, whether these are varying needs in terms of their cold chain and temperature requirements, or varying needs in terms of number of doses, or in some cases also the delivery mechanism, and of course, which manufacturer, where to pick up supplies from, so the origin nodes in the supply chain. We also need to continuously reassess the portfolio and rerun all of our scenarios as new information becomes available about the success probabilities of different vaccines. In many ways, it seems like that the key to supply chain planning in this highly uncertain environment will be using a supply chain design that is simplistic, and greater simplicity will allow us to keep running our scenarios and reconfiguring as the need arises. The make or break of this endeavor may not be how sophisticated technology we put into this, but more importantly, how well can we clarify roles and responsibilities and ensure the fast flow of information across different decision actors in the system. Simulation exercises may prove to be a useful tool, and we do have the luxury of a few months of time to conduct such simulation exercises. And when I'm talking about decision actors, I'm implying actors in the central government, state governments, district officials, local officials, private sector partners. Often when we think about who all to bring to the table, we are prompted to think, well, India has a very large birth cohort. We are used to carrying out large-scale vaccination programs, especially for pediatric vaccines, and we have a group of actors who are experienced in vaccine distribution. So let's bring them all together and start working on a plan. But it's important to keep in mind that the scale and magnitude of this effort may require us to truly expand our thinking, to see beyond the familiar. And so, in essence, wherever possible, we will need to involve actors who may have not been a part of the standard immunization EPI program logistics in the past. And I hope that the People-to-People Health Foundation, CASEPIRE, and others who are a part of this session will bring those who could be extremely important actors in the supply chain, but are not traditionally thought of as important partners. I would say in summary that rapid manufacturing and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines will be one of the most challenging initiatives that modern supply chain management has ever undertaken. But with aggressive planning, and I underscore the word aggressive, and effective partnership, it is very doable. The scientists have demonstrated to us that how effectively has science around the world, across companies and across the boundaries of competitive firms, have come together for the COVID-19 vaccine efforts. And I think now it's our turn in the supply chain logistics business to demonstrate something similar. Thank you.
With this interesting video from Professor Yadav, we would definitely send him a thanks from our side. Some of the critical points which he brought on the table was, the power of partnership, expand beyond familiar, and all together to plan. So this brings us to the end of our session 1, and we will have a poll at this stage. You will have, all of you will have 2 questions in front of you. Now, question 1 is, given the scale, who should be vaccinated first? So there are 3 options. Please choose. You have got 30 seconds. The second one is, what modifications can government consider for delivering COVID-19 vaccine at scale? So we have got another 7 seconds to go. Please vote. With this, we will end the polling, and the results are in front of you. I can read out. 72% majority of the people feel that health workers and other emergency responders must be vaccinated first, and 58% feel that the modifications in the supply chain integration is going to help in terms of delivering the vaccine at scale. So thanks. I think the results are on the expected lines. Thanks everyone for participating. We had almost 80% plus participation in this. With this, we will quickly move on to the session 2 of our webinar today, which is on technology and solutions to deliver and monitor. So the first speaker of this session is Mr. Shubhadeep Guha, who is the Director, Media Services, Google. He's going to talk on the topic of role of technology to deliver COVID-19 vaccine. So who better than Google to talk about technology? But before that, I'll give a very short brief of Shubhadeep. He is the Director, Media Services at Google and a digital marketing leader with over 2 decades of experience in transforming and scaling large functions in businesses. Listed among the top 100 digital marketers in India, Shubhadeep's business ethic spans customer-centric experiences driven by technology and enabled by digital communications. Shubhadeep is deeply passionate about education and healthcare and volunteers his time for causes in both these areas. Over to you, Shubhadeep.
Thank you, Anup. Very, very happy to be here and grateful for the opportunity. Us corporate types love to start from business problems, and as business problems go, this is probably the most unprecedented business problem one could have ever imagined, which is how do you assure the health of every human being on the planet? And in thinking about that, my read of the answer for that is what I have on one slide, is we need the vaccine needs to be there for every person of every age in every country. And I do want to spend a minute maybe diving in and double clicking on this entire piece and just using a simple lens of demand and supply. Now, we are reading a lot of, in the news wires, around manufacturing, all the different candidates, and I will not go into that. There are a bunch of very capable, sets of players. If you just, stay on the previous one, slide, please. So there are very, very capable, players who are in the space of supply. I am pointing out the fact that even if you were to have a set of vaccine candidates at this point in time, we are not ready. And why do I say that? Now, on the supply perspective, it is not that we are in a particularly bad spot, as previous speakers have also talked about. Serum Institute alone probably has a capacity of $1.2 billion. We are hearing a billion doses. We are hearing other players getting in, and despite the fact that we will share whatever vaccine we produce with the rest of the world, I would probably think that in another couple of years, we will have, the 1.3 billion dedicated for India, which we need for our population. My point is that the focus of the supply chain needs to be managing vaccine adequacy and not vaccine scarcity. And that's a pretty critical, difference which needs to be made. And from a demand perspective, what we have at this time is a very proven vaccine delivery system for 25 to 30 million infants and their mothers. And this is this gives us confidence, but do realize that this is actually not a choice. We can't really leverage this structure with COVID alone, because this will come at the cost of infant and maternal mortality. So essentially, what we are looking at and what we need is a new modern vaccine delivery infrastructure at scale. And that's what you're looking at. My vision in this perspective is that it is actually very simple today to authenticate each of us individually online. Your mobile phones enable that. You just need an OTP and you can be uniquely authenticated. You also have Aadhaar and products like those. So if I can be authenticated uniquely online, then surely my vision should be one of anytime, anywhere vaccination. An individual should be able to walk in to some station, could be a post office, could be a local clinic, could be a local hospital, or some district center, and get a shot. Now, what would that vaccine system look like is pretty much where my idea, as you'll jump into. And if you go on in the further slides, I am starting my my thinking on this with a very critical topic of vaccine wastage. There is that little kind of factoid which I've put in on the slides from WHO, as in even if you take a fraction of that particular wastage rate, given the scale we are talking about, any vaccine wastage essentially is denial of the vaccine to a large number, and which is quite frankly you'll agree is unacceptable. And so given that, how do we think about it? And this is where information becomes very important, and an information system becomes really, really important. So you will probably have a bunch of people who are the stations, like I was thinking post offices, banks, private, public, all of those could be leveraged, district offices, government bodies. But then you'll also have a partnership with the actual vaccine delivery partners, who could be NGOs, who could be, again, could be a bunch of private players, could be clinics, a variety of people. How do you manage information on all the parameters, from storage, temperature, all the ancillaries that might be required, and all that is needed to ensure that there is minimal wastage of the vaccine. And we heard a lot of focus on point of minimizing vaccine wastage. And this is where I'm saying, let's leverage technology which is available to us. Distributed ledger technologies, open source distributed ledger technologies are all out there. They're being used in different forms and ways, and we would be able to do that. We will anyway need a new solution. You are unlikely to be able to use a whole bunch of the old infrastructure, technical infrastructure. You may as well consequently get it right first time. Machine learning driven demand planning, it becomes very, very, very obvious in terms of how you think of it. And frankly, my point was that if with the amount of focus we have on electric vehicles and the battery technology, why would you not think of that from a vaccine transport perspective? So information is a pretty critical component. The next area to look at specifically would be to ensure equitability, and which is pretty much what I cover on on the next piece. And this is where my recommendation is that we will need to digitize the entire supply chain. And I am definitely, if you can move on to the next slide, maybe. what I'm talking about is an integration across all links, in the vaccine delivery setup. So I am talking of right from the manufacturers, distributors, and the entire slew of the last mile, health workers, NGOs, government bodies, whoever is in there. How do we digitize that entire supply chain management platform? And again, technology like blockchain, come in very, very simply by allowing a visible access of those critical parameters to all players involved, and who are consequently able to make the right decisions. After all, you will need dynamic prioritization, as some of our previous speakers have also talked about. And this will be really, really critical in ensuring we are able to, bring the overall supply chain and make it hum together. Because after all, this is a really critical component. While you want to ensure access, you also want to ensure access at the right time, and that's where equitability comes in. How do you ensure the vaccine reaches the people who need it the most? And continuing, the sentiment and building on the back of, minimizing wastage, ensuring equitability, comes the point of how do you manage hesitancy? And I bring in this from the fact that, after all, vaccine hesitancy, there's a quote on the next slide on, from WHO, where they are talking about that being one of the top 10 barriers or top 10 threats to global health. If you move on to the next slide, please. And the key point is that this is not merely old data around vaccine hesitancy. As recently as in the middle of May, Reuters and Ipsos conducted a pretty extensive poll in the US, talking about people's predilection for vaccine in the US. And less than 2/3 of them actually are interested, somewhat or very, in taking on a vaccine. The rest are not. They are worried about speed at which we are, kind of running in. They're worried about the politics, and the amount of noise which is out there. There's just general sets of a bunch of issues which prevent you from just taking in the vaccine. So how do you ensure that the end user actually comes in and gets vaccinated? And it is a non-trivial issue. After all, the most successful vaccine, which is out there around, say, BCG or something, has, or even MMR, and all of these have 70 to 80% or 89% penetration out there, or coverage perspective. And this is where communication becomes very important. Should be easier, relatively easy to pull off, because you have technologies like virtual reality, so you have AR and augmented reality, all of these, including a little bit of machine learning in order to kind of create push communication, which if you integrate with the testing and tracking and tracing communication, we can actually do wonders in driving education. And I do want to underscore that this softer element actually is very, very integral, because what's the point in getting the vaccine to the right people and no one walks in to get vaccinated? Or you reach someone and people don't want to get vaccinated. And finally, I did want to also, pick up, so that was the education. I did want to, pick up the subject of access, the next thing. And the last mile in any supply chain, arguably, is one of the most difficult. And if you move to the next slide, please. And this is pretty much what I would want to, kind of dive in on the last mile being most difficult, often ill-equipped, often underfunded, but they are the ones who are actually, driving the difference between a set of people having the vaccine or not. So how do we upskill the last mile? And one of the core areas is digital technologies themselves on vaccine delivery procedure. And I also think that this will need to go hand in hand with infrastructure and equipment, Internet of Things, IoT devices, wearables, and frankly, better using our smart devices, which we already have today, for information dissemination, real-time tracking and vaccine delivery. And after all, that's probably the most important focus. And I would start there right away. Starting, citizen first. I think the first thing we need to do is start upskilling the last mile, even while people are figuring out the vaccine. So to sum up, just on my last slide, what I'm talking about essentially is that, an unprecedented, business problem, which I talked about, is also an unprecedented opportunity, at this point in time. We have probably a once in a generation, opportunity for us to be able to ensure the health of every human in the country. We could pivot to vaccine adequacy, digitize the last mile, ensure awareness and education, minimize vaccine wastage, ensure equitability. All of those technologies which I talked about exist. They have been piloted and are probably in use in different forms. Our challenge is to build the infrastructure and string it all together for the greater good. That's what I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhadeep, for your interesting talk. You brought out certain very good points like wastage prevention, machine learning based dynamic prioritization. Another critical point which you brought about is the vaccine hesitancy, so which can be overcome by the communication. So brilliant thoughts. Before I let you go, I have a question for you. What do you think are the, you talked about the upgradation which is needed in the infrastructure, but what is the current state of the track and trace infrastructure, which you think that what kind of gap is there between the current infrastructure which is available and what we envisage to deliver it at this scale?
Absolutely. Great question, Anup. See, I would say, firstly, let's look at this as a harmonization of technology with manual efforts when it comes to kind of tracking and tracing. I don't think, and I know I'm making a provocative statement, but I don't think any solution that is out there, any automated tracking and tracing solution out there, has the ability to replace manual intervention on its own. So it is a complement and needs to be seen as complementary to manual effort. The human beings are the detectives, and the technology will deliver the insights using which the detectives need to kind of then figure out how they progress. I would say that the biggest opportunity also is in the Indian context is in improving our testing coverage itself. As in, while it has improved by leaps and bounds, we are still probably only covering less than a third of our population. And also the additional challenge we now have is that COVID has, the infection rate has moved out of Bombay and Delhi and is now increasingly in our hinterland. So testing becomes increasingly complicated in that spot because our health infrastructure is far weaker. So how we manage those and testing, tracing and tracking, work accordingly. And in that context, leveraging technologies like mobile, and all the APIs that are coming up and all the solutions that are coming up, would be very, very critical. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Thank you, Shubhadeep. The next speaker with us today is Professor Prashant Yadav. He is the Director, Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur. He will take us through the topic of how to build a resilient supply chain and be ready for delivery. So I invite Professor Shah, but I'll just give a brief introduction. Professor Shah is the founding director and professor of operations management at IIM Udaipur. He's a leading authority in the field of supply chain management and operations strategy, both in India and abroad. He's an author, recipient of various awards, supported various top industry academia in teaching and supply chain strategy innovation. Over to you, Professor Shah.
Thank you, Anup, for inviting me on this seminar. I think this is one of the most important topic because all of us have been concerned about this issue that how do we get back to normal life? And as all the previous panel members have talked about, this is one of the most complex problems which probably humankind has seen. That we're talking about saying, can we get humankind back on rail, let's say by 2021? Now, couple of issues here. One, there are huge amount of uncertainties involved. And what I'm going to argue that it's not just important to build a good, efficient chain, but probably more important to build a resilient chain, which will ensure that by 2021, we are actually delivering. I mean, if you just look at India's economy, we're a 2.7 trillion economy. Even if because of this, we are able to ensure 1% higher growth rate, we talk about a $27 billion US. So I think a lot more focus will have to be in terms of how do we make sure that we build this as a robust and resilient chain. And when we look at this whole value chain in terms of development, manufacturing, and this delivery, the delivery is the most complex because you have a large number of organizations involved. You have a large number of people involved in this whole chain. So that's the reason this issue of how do we build this resilient distribution system. You know, especially if you just look at our own experience of the way we have managed the pandemic, unfortunately, we not managed it well. And one of the lessons we have learned is just throwing resources not going to solve the problem. Actually, we have the case of the country which had the highest resources, but actually have delivered in a way which not all of us are proud of. So, you know, I want to step back and say, how do we throw all we know in terms of handling this such a complex problem? And the way I look at it is that when we look at different disciplines, we'll have to see if we can draw from those disciplines and try and design a solution which is more robust. Now, our past experiences have shown that 80% of the problems are actually design problems. So if you don't design system well, finally it'll throw up as execution problems. Now, I'm going to suggest that let's draw lessons from 3 different disciplines which will help us in building this resilient supply chain. The key is going to be risk management. We have a fairly, I would say, mature discipline in terms of how do we manage risk. So that we should draw. Since we are dealing with a large complex project, we talk about immunization to a large number of people in a 1-year time. So we're dealing with a large projects and program. And again, we have a fairly decent understanding of best practices in managing large complex projects. And finally, we're dealing with supply chains. So there are a lot of learnings in terms of managing complex supply chain. Several of my colleagues have talked about some of them, but I'm going to put all these 3 together in terms of how do we build resilient supply chain, and then finally few certain key issues in a design. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about a risk management, actually we have a fairly decent understanding of risk, partly from a knowing in the past vaccination programs. So we have had several, for example, polio has been a successful case, but there have been several cases which have not been successful. For example, there was a rotavirus vaccine where we introduced, but within 1 year we had to withdraw, and again for 8 years we couldn't get it back. So I think we have a fairly decent understanding from our past experience of vaccine, execution in terms of how do we, identify risk. Several panel members have talked about a lot of risk which are coming primarily because we have done a fast track of development and manufacturing. Typically manufacturing and distribution was never in a critical, was never critical when it came to developing this whole chain. Usually the development of, phase 3 and the FDA approvals took longest time. That gave us enough time to set up all this. Unfortunately for our distribution professionals, this time we do not have this luxury and we've become on a critical path. So the whole lot of risk which are going to come because of acceleration which has happened in the development and manufacturing, we're going to face in this distribution. Large number of people, product portfolio, and we are going to get fair amount of, we have to be prepared on one in terms of, the demand side, as some speakers talk about, we shouldn't take it for granted that people will come and take this. There is going to be a whole lot of fake news which we'll have to grapple with. So there's going to be issues on the demand side, and there are going to be issues also in terms of adverse, there are going to be side effects, there are going to be adverse things. Are we ready for it? So what we will have to do is to look at all this risk and identify into 2 categories. One set of issues where we are saying, can we mitigate those risks? When we talk about a diversity of pooling, there are a lot of the having a private and public partnership. So there are several ideas which are out there. So the speakers have already talked about it, through which we can mitigate the risk. But still we'll have a fair amount of risk, which will be there part of our system, can we prepare our system for, whenever we discover a risk, can we recover fast from it? So there's a whole lot of, ideas from risk management, which we need to put it in this project. Next slide, please. We also, know how to manage. Next slide, please. How to manage the large projects. And in general, we talk about, in general, there is a different kinds of uncertainty. For example, we talked about capacity, we talked about transportation. In some areas, the uncertainty is in terms of whether we will, wastage, for example, are we going to deal with a wastage of 10% or 20%? That's a variation. But there are a whole lot of foreseen uncertainty. There is a possibility of a, side effect, adverse reactions, the fake news part of it. There are going to be a whole lot of unknowns. Now, can we design our system for reducing complexity? On one hand, there'll be tendency to say, can we use this to build a lot of capacity? The way previous speaker talked about, it's a great opportunity. But then also you're introducing complexity in the system. So do you work with the simple systems, or you want to introduce a lot more complexity? And there's also issue that we need to work with a milestone-based scheduling. We may have a goal of 2021, but we also want to get a periodic, results. So somewhere, how do you do this? Learn from this milestone-based scheduling. The last discipline we want to learn from is in the supply chain side. There's a lot of, ideas which have been there. For example, managing shortage gaming. It's a very well-developed field, but we saw, for example, in managing, COVID-19, that we ended up with a lot of shortages. I think there are a lot of learning from that. Similarly, a lot of partners, different partners have a different risk-taking capability. For example, private partners would have some risk-taking capability. The public would have another. How do we make sure that different states, different stakeholders together, we manage this in an effective way? Let me just end with just identifying few issues and say, putting all this together, there are few critical issues we'll have to handle in a design stage. Primary that would be ensuring that we have a strategy in place where risk management is an important element, and make sure that several elements in terms of how do you simplicity along with responsiveness, how do we put in place and use technology in an effective way. But let me stop here, and I was just trying to build on all previous speakers in terms of how do you build resilient supply chain, because that's going to be one of the important elements in the distribution.
Thank you very much, Professor Shah. You brought about good points in terms of excellent point on the resilient supply chain, and good design leads to good executions. Risk management, reduce complexity, and tackling fake news. I think these are very, very pertinent points which you brought up. But before you go, I wanted to ask you that do you think the current methodology of distribution is adequate, or we think that it won't be adequate? But what are the 2 or 3 things which we can, do in a medium to long term? Short term, I won't say, but medium to long term. What are the 2 to 3 things which you think quickly, we can do?
So, it's an interesting question, because, we have one of the best immunizations program in place. But, that's designed for a sort of a mature system kind of thing. But the moment you say, can I use this system for this whole uncertain and scaling up, I don't think we are geared for that. It could be as simple as, it could be at district level, I have a information system which works on a min-max, kind of approach. The whole thing breaks down in a current environment. Similarly, traditionally, the wastage in a system used to be negotiated over a period of time. Like BCG today, we talk about 50% wastage, polio, we talk about 10%. All this, we'll have to put in place very quickly. Now, my sense is, the current mindset and the way of looking at it actually might become a bottleneck. So somewhere, how do we change this? So change management is going to be a critical issue. I definitely see a technology in a long horizon is going to be very important. It's an interesting question whether do you want to introduce a lot of those elements in a short term.
Thank you, Professor Shah. I know it is in a limited time very difficult to delve deeper into the question, but thank you so much for your talk. So this brings us to the end of the session 2, and with this we will have a poll at this juncture. So we have 2 questions on your screen. Do you think India possesses the required technology and infrastructure to administer the COVID vaccine to its 1.3 billion citizens? Please calculate. You have 3 options. Then second one is, what alternate delivery network can be leveraged to deliver vaccines in remote parts of India? We have 3 options. You have another 10 seconds to go. About 50% people have voted. I would urge the rest to please do it. So about 70%, 80% people voted. And for the first one, we have yes, about 53% of the people feel that India does not have the required technology. So I think we will, of course, that's what we are discussing currently. And in terms of the delivery methodology, people feel that India Post and private sector both should be leveraged. 77% of the people feel that. And this actually brings us to the discussion that private-public partnership is going to be the key in delivering this vaccine. So we will stop the poll here. Thank you so much. And we would move on to the third and the last session of today's webinar, which is the third session is on power of partnership for last mile delivery. So we know that how important it is to develop good public-private partnership for the last mile delivery. To cover this session, I would now invite Dr. Raj Shankar Ghosh. He is the Deputy Director, Vaccine Delivery, BMGF. He is going to take us through the topic of increased collaboration for equitable and timely delivery of vaccine. But before he begins, I'll give a little brief about Dr. Ghosh. He's a physician and a public health training professional. Dr. Ghosh is currently Deputy Director, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Over the past 30 years, Dr. Ghosh has worked across multiple sectors in government and non-government agencies on primary health care. His focus has been on vaccine delivery and infectious diseases, particularly neglected tropical diseases. So we can't have a better person than Dr. Ghosh to please cover this topic. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anup. And I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this discussion, very rich discussion going on. Before I start, I just wanted to say that I will take this opportunity to discuss about partnership across the 3 Ds of vaccines, which is vaccine development, vaccine delivery, and also the issue about detection. Detection primarily meaning about disease surveillance, vaccine preventable disease surveillance. The partnership word is not new to the government when it comes to vaccine delivery. In fact, in our routine immunization and all the major vaccine programs that have been held in India, the government has partnered with multiple organizations from donors like Gavi, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UN agencies like WHO, UNICEF, UNDP, with agencies which are multinational representatives of which are here today, PATH, JSI, CHAI, the Clinton Health Initiatives. And then, also with major Indian technology firms like the ones who we have heard about, the EVIN program, the Logistibo, they have sort of contributed to this program very effectively. The third point that I really want to bring is that, in the past also we have had programs like the Pulse Polio program, the National Immunization Days, when in the beginning, the program managers really thought that how would they be able to reach such a vast, population, such a large number of children in 1995 when systems were not so strong, but India did a good program. I still want to say that with the uncertainties today, we really do not know what it will take India to reach every citizen. What we do know is that if India prioritizes the program well, then I completely agree with my previous speaker that a resilient system needs to be built in which within a year or two, we will be able to reach the whole population. We need to understand very clearly that the vaccine will be available within a certain period of time, and we hope it will be available soon in the first quarter of 2021, as we keep on hearing. And if it is available, it will not wait for a robust system to be there in order for it to be delivered. So the partnership will have to primarily address the whole issue about, what is the current system and what do we do best in order to deliver the vaccine within the current system. Having said that, I will start with a very brief anecdote that almost 28 years back, one health worker had very simply told us that what vaccine delivery primarily takes is a product which needs to be delivered to a place where two types of people converge. One who receive the vaccine and one who will deliver the vaccine. So basically what we need is a product which is safe and which is efficacious, that needs to reach a place. And we have to remember that this place is a very important aspect, because the place actually is an important aspect in terms of the accessibility and the acceptability by the population of that place for them to take their children or themselves for the vaccination program. And finally, we need to have people who are trained. I think we heard previously from speakers about the capacity building of the health workers. That needs to happen. And we need to create that demand amongst the population in order for them to have the vaccine. The second thing that I want to say, another very brief anecdote, is that once after a very long 2-hour session about partnership, a very simple question had come from one of the participants, is that we can talk about partnership for very long, but what it really boils down to is we need to know exactly who needs to do what. What does the government need to do? What do the respective partners need to do? So the most important part here is for the government actually to work with the partners to identify their strengths and identify the role that they will play. India has conducted a very important program, Mission Indradhanush, very recently intensified Mission Indradhanush. After that very large program, the success of that program has been because every partner who was involved in it knew exactly what they have to do. So let me take you through a few constructs around the whole delivery program and the partnership. So what are we trying to do? In the first construct that I will tell you is that basically the whole thing is about access. It is about demand. It is about the impact of the program, impact of the product on the population. And finally, most important thing that we have to remember is the sustainability issue. The other important thing that we have to remember is that the partnership is all around the development of the product, around identifying an easy to reach and acceptable place for the community to come. And thirdly, the training of the health workers and around mobilizing the people with awareness amongst them to seek the services that are offered at the place. If we can do this together as partners, each playing our effective role, our strengths out, then we will be able to do what we can. Because there is an uncertainty around the program, and I was reading many of the questions, some questions that Rajiv Tandon and others had asked, is that because we do not know even how the vaccine is going to be administered, it is very difficult for us at this point to say as to what we really need from each of the partners to play. We know their overall strengths. So let's come to the second construct. The second construct that I want to bring around partnership is that we need to understand very clearly that prioritization is going to be one of the most important game changers in the whole delivery program. If you are able to prioritize the population well, then we will be able to do a good job. Finally, what we need to understand is that the product and the services that are being delivered, they do not cause any harm to the population that it is being delivered to. I just now heard about vaccine safety, and I just want to make a simple correction about the Rota vaccine thing that was said. I need to make that correction. That Rota was not introduced in India before. Rota has been introduced in India only recently, and it has never been stopped in India. Very rightly, as the speaker said, the Rota vaccine was introduced in US, and because of the safety issues, it was withdrawn. We have learned our lesson from that, and vaccine safety needs to be always remembered as one of the most important aspects of a vaccine delivery program. The third aspect is, the role that the partners can play. The partners can obviously play a very strong catalytic role where they will bring their strengths to support the government in its program. PATH, JSI, the two partners present here today, bring very strong catalytic role to the government's program. They can bring competition. We know about the various vaccine manufacturers and how they proactively are developing competition between them in terms of developing a very effective vaccine, safe vaccine. And this competition is a healthy competition for the country because the country has then multiple choices of vaccine. For example, in case of Rota vaccine, India uses 2 vaccines in the same program, routine immunization program, and this competition is a healthy competition. And the third one that, they can bring about is the whole issue about the catalytic role, the collaborative role that, they can bring about in terms of supporting the government in its role. The final construct that I want to bring is that all of this has to be done under a framework. That framework that we need to bring about is the whole issue about working under a terms of reference that is acceptable to both the government and the various partners that are working. The second thing that we need to talk about is that the partners need to do a self-assessment of their functions so that they can live up to the expectation of the quality that is expected out of them. And finally, we need to have regulatory processes which will determine the function of each of the partners. By regulation, I mean that they will follow a certain standards or principles. And finally, they need to do the joint review of the program. We have heard of successful programs around polio. We have heard about EVIN. I'm sure that, with the current COVID vaccine, with good prioritization, with effective partnership, India will do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. You brought about very interesting points on the 3 Ds of partnership, 3 Ps of product, place, and people in terms of delivery of vaccine, the role of partnerships, and the constructs in terms of coverage, quality, and safety. Very pertinent points. You brought out a very interesting point on the means the public-private partnership is a given thing, which is currently also happening, and I
Absolutely.
think for COVID delivery also it is going to be prominently adhered to. But you brought out an interesting point that the role of partnerships. So what do you think in the current situation, where are we in terms of allocating that role, or at what stage this role will be allocated to certain partners by the government?
Yeah, I'll be very brief in that reply. There are 2 things that we need to understand. One is that the partners bring unique strengths to them. So if I look at the public sector partners, what do they bring? They bring a huge infrastructure that is available for delivery of the vaccine. They set the regulations around how the vaccination program needs to happen. And thirdly, the resources that they bring, the human resources, and obviously nobody is richer than the government. The government brings huge financial resources into the program. What does the private sector bring? The private sector brings in a great opportunity of innovation, and they have fantastic alternate delivery models, which the government does not have the opportunity to, cater to. So these alternate delivery models would be very, very helpful. The second point that I want to really bring about is around the incentives. There must be incentives for both the public and the private sector in order to do this. The public sector must have the technologies and the products at an affordable price developed by the private sector. And the private sector must have the entire market that is opened up to them by the reach to the whole population, the access to the population. And secondly, the congenial environment must be built for product development and delivery for the private sector in order to support the program and work with the government.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for your detailed reply. The next speaker of the day is Ms. Neeraj Jain. He's Country Director, PATH. He's going to take us on the topic, discuss on the topic of partnership for delivering vaccines to the last mile. And I'll give you a little brief. He's the Country Director of PATH since 2016 and has over 27 years of leadership experience in India and abroad. He is doing some innovative work in different public health verticals like TB, HIV, neglected tropical diseases. He's a member of the CII's Nutrition and Public Health Committees, where he engages with industry leaders on the need for greater investments in India in public health systems. Over to you, Mr. Jain.
Thanks, Anup. I think with the speed that Anup was speaking, you understand we're running behind. So I'm going to go fairly quickly. Being one of the last speakers has its advantages that there's everybody's already spoken what I had planned to speak. But I'll take care of both of those. So I think firstly, I just want to say that, the challenge is huge. And the challenge is huge mostly because of the fact that we've got a very strange tension between the private as well as the public sector demand for this vaccine. Everybody wants it. There's going to be a shortage. There's going to be a scramble. And it's already started. People are already starting to book production capacities. And these challenges will continue. Now, the only way to actually overcome this is through partnerships. It is, we all need to put all hands on deck. We need to know how we're going to prioritize and move forward. For the audience, we have 165 vaccine candidates are currently around the world in process. Fast track regulatory approvals are being sought. There's going to be very limited supply, and I'll talk a little bit about it in a bit. And a lot of organizations, governments are going to try and monopolize on this vaccine as we go forward. So there is already a scramble. There are already, capacities being booked. And so that's going to be a scramble. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is really because this is not going to be about vaccine development in another 6 months. It's going to be all about vaccine manufacturing and who gets what, and how are we going to provide equitable access. This also happened in 2009 during the flu pandemic. We've seen a bit of that, but COVID has gone into sort of a multiplier as far as that is concerned. There's another area which PATH has done a bit of work around is it's not just getting the vaccine candidate approved. It's also about the vials. It's also about, where is all that, where are the vials and the needles, etc., going to come from, and how are we going to meet those capacities. So it's going to be very important that a large-scale multi-country partnership is going to be there for manufacturing, for prioritization, as well as for supply chain, cold chain, etc. I think just to take a global view on manufacturing capacities, the CEPI, which is CEPI and BMGF in partnership with CHAI and PATH, did a survey across the world. This was between April and June of this year. And of the 113 manufacturers from over 30 countries that we surveyed, what came out was that we probably will have a total capacity of 2 to 4 billion vaccines next year. Which is going to make it more difficult because you will have to prioritize. Additionally, COVAX has been set up by CEPI in partnership with Gavi as well as WHO, which is really a mechanism to bring equitable access to multiple countries and see how this is going to move. They already have 9 candidates which are already in part of their part of their kitty, and they're looking at another 9. Even the famous one which Serum is currently sort of producing, 100 million doses of those have also been committed. But having said that, looking at our population, there's going to be a challenge. This whole challenge, the global challenge, can actually only be met by partnerships where the governments come together, researchers come together, manufacturers come together, and multilateral partners come together and really work towards this. The test is going to be for health equity. Are we going to make equitable access for COVID vaccine or not? And how are we going to do that? I think there's a lot of work to be done. At the moment, everybody is focusing on the trial piece. You know, how is the trial? What phase are you in, etc., etc. But actually, going forward, like I said, in the next few months, it'll all be about production capacities. What capacity is booked by who? How are these moving forward? Just moving to the last mile, which is going to be absolutely critical. There's this whole thing about, okay, how is this last mile going to work? Is it going to be part of the current immunization system? Do we need to think differently, or do we need to completely think out of the box? And I just want to make a point that we will probably have to completely think out of the box, because this is not something, it's a pandemic. We are actually responding to a pandemic. So it's kind of like on a mission mode in that sense. It's probably not business that is going to continue post-COVID. Hopefully not. Hopefully until we don't have the next pandemic, we don't need to look at something like this. And we'll have to be really, really efficient and nimble doing this. So everything would have to change. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully I've helped to make up some time for you. So go ahead, Anup.
Thank you, Neeraj. You covered some pertinent points in a very short time, and obviously you talked about the equitable access to the vaccine. But the question which is bugging my mind is that with your with past experience and your experience in terms of the last mile delivery, what is going to be very different, or if you were to handle this, what you're going to be doing differently than what you're doing currently? Of course, the scale is definitely there, but in terms of a very high level, 2-3 things.
So, I have a few points here. I think firstly, there are many vaccines with different types of efficacy levels, different packaging. Earlier speakers have talked about different requirements of cold chain, etc. So once we have clarity on that and how that is going to distribute, I mean, right now we have 2 rotavirus vaccines in India, and we already have challenges of how do you deliver and how do you ensure that they are delivered well. So that's going to be a large challenge. There's going to be also a requirement to actually track the vaccine to the last, to the last individual, to actually track each vaccine to individual, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of malpractice. We saw that with remdesivir when it came out. We're seeing that with plasma now, where you're hearing of all kinds of malpractice. The vaccine will probably face a similar challenge going forward. So every vial would have to be tracked from the factory right to the end user. That's going to be important. I think also our supply chains are not geared to actually deal with something of this proportion. We are also not really geared to deal with adverse events to the extent that we may have to see in this case, because you've got multiple vaccines. They've been pushed through the trial process very quickly, and rightly so. But the expectation or the possibility of adverse events probably multiplies in that situation. So that's going to be the thing. I think, I was listening to Subhradeep and Dheeraj. Dheeraj is coming on, but Subhradeep, but we've got Google, who could actually digitize the entire process. We've got Dheeraj from Unilever, who runs probably one of the most efficient supply chains across the country when it comes to FMCG. I think it'll be important for us to really come together with organizations like that, government, NGOs, private players, etc., to deliver on this. It's going to take all of us.
Thank you very much, Neeraj, for your interesting insights. The last speaker of the day, but not the least, is Mr. Dheeraj Arora. He is the Vice President, E-commerce and Omnichannel from Unilever India. He's going to take us through on the learnings from private sector to deliver at scale. Dheeraj, before I invite you, a little introduction of yourself. With an experience of over 20 years, Dheeraj has worked across general trade, modern trade, shopper marketing, trade marketing, sales operations, and sales automation. Currently is the VP Modern Trade, E-commerce, cash and carry, institutional business at Unilever. He's also had some key profiles, Director Route to Market and Sales IT for South Asia, Africa, and Russia. Over to you, Dheeraj.
Thanks, Anup. Really appreciate the entire work being done and giving us the opportunity to join in. And Neeraj left at the right note for me to take on from here. So maybe we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so Neeraj mentioned about FMCG, and FMCG actually is an umbrella term used for very large variety of daily consumer needs products. All of us are aware of, so I don't have to delve too much into what FMCG is. And it actually covers 4 different parts of business: home care, personal care, foods, beverages, and OTC drugs and supplements. And we at HUL are present across all 4, especially now with the acquisition of GSK portfolio. We straddle this entire portfolio across all these 4 segments. But what's more important is to understand, what goes in terms of being available on the shelf, because at the end of the day, for the entire FMCG sector, the job to be done is to be available on the shelf when the shopper or the consumer walks into that store or orders online the product that he or she is looking for. And then it's a large network. As you can see, it's a network of 1 crore outlets across the length and breadth of this country, largely led by grocers that contribute almost 75% numerically and almost 70% plus of the business coming through. And for all the FMCG companies, this is the chunk of the route to market which everybody works on to deliver very optimally. Moving on, if you see, there are 3 legs to it. It's the consumer, it's the shopper, it's the manufacturer, and this entire RTM or the stores. Next slide, please. So this process of making FMCG products available in these channels is a multi-stage process which involves movement of goods across states, across route to markets, or at multi levels. If I were to take this in a lot of detail for you, and this is like FMCG network, which is true for every company in this country. The scale and size will obviously differ depending on the portfolio we handle. And this is what Neeraj was referring to when he was calling out on Unilever. The next slide, please. Yeah. So it starts with manufacturing. And in this case, we are talking about manufacturing of all the FMCG products, like we have been discussing since the last 1.5 hours in terms of the development of the vaccine. It moves to warehousing, and from there to the distributors. Now, up till this warehousing part is called primary distribution and is very controlled environment by the manufacturers themselves. And then comes the movement to the distributors, to these outlets. And that's the entire route market, reaching out to that crore outlets that I spoke about. Now, all said and done, what FMCG I think thrives on is a very robust supply chain that delivers day in and day out like clockwork. So, and then we heard about the importance of having a very robust supply chain. So FMCG is one such sector which has it. Any slip and the availability can be affected. The product itself can be impacted depending on what product you're talking about. It's meant and it's built to manage large portfolios, and we spoke and we heard some of the eminent speakers talking about this vaccine also may not be a single dosage but a multitude or portfolio. So is FMCG built. For any company, it can vary between a few products to a few hundred products For us, it is upward of 500 SKUs that we ship out day in and day out. Obviously, it's coupled with technology, because to manage such a large network, you need that technology, you need that MIS, you need transparency of information, and all of it is ingrained as a backbone to deliver this service. And it is dependent on a very tight and very rigorous demand planning, production planning, and distribution planning to ensure each and every SKU is available in the desired quantity in that store when the shopper walks in. As Neeraj mentioned earlier, it is a significantly optimized value chain, dependent very strongly on partners, whether it is C&FAs, whether it is distributors, and all the retailers. So it's dependent on partners and intermediaries. And obviously, there are some nuances with respect to what product portfolio you handle. So this RTM, or this entire value chain, is also built to meet the requirements of the product. To give you an example, the normal soap, laundry powders, etc., that we see has a very normal FMCG with respect to temperatures or value chain. But when it comes to dairy, the value chain may have some specific requirements with respect to temperatures, with respect to the format of the product. Or let's say ice creams, you may require a very temperature dependent cold chain of frozen products. And those are some of the nuances which come in depending on the product, the type of product, the format of the product, and those are some of the additional capabilities and nuances which are required to meet this value chain. But when we see from HUL lens on the next chart, this entire RTM, we have it's completely dependent on partners. Can we move to the next slide, please? It's very largely dependent on partners, 1,000+ suppliers and associates with upward of 3,000 distributors. Every day, thousands of salesmen and delivery teams going on ground to capture the demand from these stores and bring it back, and then the entire supply chain working to fulfill that demand with the help of almost 100,000+ Shakti entrepreneurs, which predominantly operate in rural areas, deep interiors of this country, thus serving upwards of 2 million stores for HUL products. As I said, we are present across brands and categories, and with a very strong product play and position within the categories that we operate in. We have some very large brands, and all of you are aware of the Surf, the Wheel, Fair moving on. So Lifebuoy, Brook Bond, Dove, Ponds, and so on and so forth. To service the shoppers, almost 9 out of 10 Indian households use at least one HUL product once a year, and almost 1/3 of the money spent on branded FMCG categories comes onto HUL products. So we have an experience of 75+ years of serving this large network, and that's a very strong and robust supply chain network that we have, which helps us deliver day in and day out. So that's just to give you an example of the kind of scale the FMCG companies operate with, and second, very large scale partnerships that help us deliver at such scale. Thank you so much, and over to you, Anup.
Thank you, Dheeraj, for an interesting talk, and how this chain is going to be akin to FMCG. But I have a question for you that you did touch upon the cold chain. How the cold chain is going to be very different, because I think we all of us know that the vaccine is going to be requiring cold chain, and you having so much of experience in cold chain, what different in what way will it be different than what you are currently following?
So, two parts to it. I would say upwards of 95% of our business does not require any cold chain. It's only ice creams business that requires cold chain. And when we say cold chain, this then means right from your primary service to your warehousing, to how you store it, to your distributor warehousing, and even at the store point, managing the temperature of each of the storage area. So, for example, if you see one of the products that we have which requires cold chain is in the space of ice creams, but that is deep frozen. The temperatures required are much lower. It's not like normal temperatures of 1 to 5 degrees. It's much lower than that, and that requires whether it is the vehicles carrying it, or you would have seen in tier 2 towns those carts carrying ice creams, and what we see in the store, the freezers which carry ice creams. All of them have to be managed at the temperature where the product quality does not deteriorate. Very different from managing a specific temperature for medicines, which is not so deep. But for the rest of our portfolio, which is whether it is home care, personal care, or the rest of the foods part of the business, there is no requirement of such temperature controls. So it does require at every leg of it a very different temperature managed assets to deliver the product promise that the shopper is looking for.
Thank you, Dheeraj. We now are at the end of the session 3, and here are the poll questions. The 2 questions: how to strengthen public-private partnership. There are 3 options there. And what are the potential new technologies to deliver COVID-19 vaccines to the last mile in the Indian context? So please attempt these questions. So we'll end the polling. So we have the results. 60% of the people feel that you need a clear policy directive for role of public and private sector. And to the second question, people feel that all of these tools will be needed, the drones, the AI, IT tools, and 84% feel that we need all of these. So these are the poll results. Thank you everyone for participating in these polls. So we have a few, last leg, the last leg remaining, and we will take a few questions. Though there are, thanks for shooting, quite a few questions to us, which are very interesting. And I'm going to ask, just pick up, so if, pardon me if I don't pick up your question. So a question which has come up is how to make cutting edge technology coexist and work in tandem, especially in a resource poor setting like India, where we have glaring gaps at tier 2 and 3 city rural areas. I would ask maybe Shubhadeep, if you can pick up this question from Google. Shubhadeep, you're on mute.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You're pointing me to the first one, right?
Yeah, how to make cutting edge technology coexist and work in tandem, especially in a resource poor country like India, where we have glaring gaps at tier 2 and 3 city rural areas.
Absolutely. I put in a response also to that, I think it was Ratnakar's question. So thank you for that question. See, my point of view on this is, I think the 5 months of lockdown have also proven that some of those fears may not be fully founded though. After all, our data network is one of the cheapest the world over. And from a connectivity perspective, while not ideal, I would say, largely, the world has kind of, gone on, and in India specifically, we have all been pretty well connected, between different areas. I'm not saying it's ideal, but I'm also saying it may not be the roadblock that we all, myself included, would have thought of it in the past. The other piece is that one of the biggest advances in technology, which I have seen in the last 2 decades, frankly, has been the fact that from needing specialized knowledge of specific languages and specific techniques, coding today is significantly more democratized. And today you are able to, a lot more people are able to join in and partner, be it due to open source, be it due to cloud. But frankly, all the stacks are also very, very different. So technology is far more accessible, at this point in time. And that is pretty, critical. So I don't think it will be as big an issue. It will still be a challenge, but I don't think it will be as big an issue.
Thank you, Shubhadeep. I have another interesting question. Should the COVID-19 vaccine available in the private sector also, along with the government sector? What can be the challenge? Dr. Ghosh, can I shoot this question to you?
Yes, I think, my friend Neeraj also already answered this question on the chat box. I think, yes, in order to have the maximum reach, the vaccine needs to be available both in all the sectors. But as I said before that, there needs to be a very strong understanding between the private and the public sector around the policies and the guidelines of delivering this vaccine. The private sector needs to have the right infrastructure for delivering this vaccine to the population it requires. And obviously, the government needs to set up certain guidelines and regulations on how and at what sort of price the vaccine is also delivered to the population. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. So unfortunately, we don't have enough time for the rest of the questions. I still want to thank people for sending the questions. Before we end, I would like to hand over to Dr. Palo for his few last words and some critical announcement which he wants to make. Over to you, Dr. Palo.
Can I have the slide, please? Hello. Hello. Thank you, Anup. And just I want to announce there is a alliance that we are kind of announcing at this point. This Asia Africa Supply Chain Transfer Health Alliance. Primarily, it's a health supply chain alliance, and bringing these stakeholders together to work together collaboratively and bringing the new technology and the improving the processes, kind of how to mobilize the partners, together for more impactful intervention. So this is for more details of this coalition. You will get information, the link given here, and this will be up in the website also soon. You can reach to us info@phfindia.org, and couple of the broader scope work for this coalition. Can I have the next slide? So the focus of this network is advocacy for improving policy strategies and operating systems for improved public health supply chain. Second is more providing policy and program recommendations based on the contemporary evidence and technological solutions. Third is support and supplement to government initiatives to health supply chain, and partnership, bringing more collaboration and leveraging private sector good practices into the public health system, and resource mobilization and support in capacity building and lobbying for effective health supply chain. Then platform to showcase evidence good, again, bringing the partners together and sharing the learnings and ideas. So that's one. And the other focus could be more on coming up the position papers or publications. So these are the broad kind of outline just based on our initial assessment, and more information will be soon, and we'll be reaching out to partners and institutions and individuals who would be interested to part of the alliance, and we'll be happy to provide more information. Thank you. Over to Anu.
Thank you, Dr. Palu. With this, we come to the end of our webinar. I would like to put on record the thanks which we would like to mention from PPHF and KSPIRE to each of the panel member and the participants. We thank them from the bottom of our heart. We have definitely benefited from their thoughts, which will come in good stead for us to encounter the supply chain challenges once the vaccine is available. We feel that these preparations will come in good stead, and we'll be able to vaccinate a bulk of the people without any problems. I also would like to thank the participants for their very active participation. Unfortunately, we could not cover many questions, which we have got a whole lot of questions, which we will be responding through emails. There were some probing questions, which I'm sure have been, some we tried to answer, but we will answer the rest on the email. Thank you all very much for this interesting subject. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anup. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.